Glenn and his wife Anne have lived in Coleman Street since 1996, newcomers really. They have two children who both attended North Fitzroy Primary School and now at Fitzroy High School. So please welcome Glenn to fill you in on what's going on.
Okay, well, our history started with this development site actually quite a long time ago, back in 2002 when development was first proposed on this site. Back then it was industrially zoned, so it had to be rezoned in order to become residential. So we got the letter from council. What was proposed at the time was 8 stories, bulky building, usual sort of questionable parking concessions. And so a public meeting was convened by the Yarra Council. We met in this very room and to talk about this development, but because of a rezoning it had to go to a planning panel process. So that in a way was good because we had Kathy Mitchell, who is the most senior planner in the state these days, chairing that panel, and they had a good look on it. And through that whole process, we, by the way, we were assisted by the councillors of the day. So we had Greg Barber, who was with the Greens and now their leader in the upper house in the state. And we had a new kid on the block sort of councillor, one Jackie Fristacchi, who introduced herself at our door one day. So she was involved in the process as well. And we had assistance from Richard Wynne, who then as now was our local member. So the planning panel had a look at it. And in the end, they were concerned about a number of aspects. So it was trimmed back to 5 stories. They were concerned about the issue of heritage sight lines, so being able to pick out the against the sky the crenellations of that Art Deco building, the famous pink and purple thing that this is all about, and also the heritage buildings like those in Coleman Street. So they didn't want it to be visible over the top, and they also didn't want the shadows to shade the public open space across Queen's Parade. So they trimmed it back to 21.8 metres or 5 stories. So we thought, you know, there's a draft permit struck. We thought that was the end of it. Most likely it was a reasonable outcome for the residents. We were okay with it. Reasonable payday for the developers, you'd think, 172 apartments. And so we all retired to our houses and wondered when the building was going to start. Well, it never started. So time passed and nothing seemed to happen, and nothing continued to happen. So kind of like the One Ring, it faded into memory. But like the One Ring, it wasn't done with us yet. So 13 years later, in 2016, we get the letter from the council, and but having been here for now 20 years, it's kind of become almost a conditioned reflex. You go, oh, here's another one. You open it up, you think, oh, well, what have we got this time? You're expecting to see the same things, somewhere between 3 and 6 stories. You're expecting to see some dubious parking claims like we don't need a full complement of parking because there's parking outside in the 15-minute zones outside the school, or somewhere halfway to Wangaratta, or you know, the usual sort of stuff. So yeah, it's pretty much, as I think Steve said, it's become like a pantomime. You know, we play our part and they play their part, and you know, if it's really horrible, we put in at least an objection to try and get some reason into these things. If it's really horrible, we may go to IDAC and lose some part of our life that we'll never get back. But this one, we open the envelope and 16 stories, 476 apartments on the same site that the planning panel had already made their assessment of. Very, very bulky building. Big Grand Canyon in the middle, all the bulk pushed to the outside to magnify the effect on the surrounding heritage building. Utterly unsympathetic design to the heritage streetscape. I mean, you know, you've seen it, you kind of know what I'm talking about. So we all kind of went into a panic, you know. There was a hastily convened meeting in Coleman Street of the residents, and that kind of was the basis of this group that has started. So we had very little time to respond, and it was a very dense proposal, hundreds of pages, A3, badly scanned for the most part, and when you're looking at these things, you have to assess it against the Yarra Planning Scheme. Now, the Yarra Planning Scheme, if you haven't had the pleasure, is 1,034 pages on its own. Then you've got to look at things like the high density design guidelines, which is another tome in its own right. Sundry other planning regulations. I mean, you couldn't possibly know all of them or where they are or what's in them. And so you, as a layman, you have to do this in very fast time to respond to these things. So we did that. We submitted our objections. We kind of got a public awareness campaign going, because these letters don't go to many people. They only tend to go into a very isolated area, and you only have to stand here to realise that that thing is going to impinge upon a hell of a lot of people that are not in the immediate streets around it. So anyway, we did all that, and in the end I believe we got around 480 objections submitted to council, so thank you very much everyone who submitted an objection. And then we thought, well, here we go, that's going to be either at IDAC or a full council meeting, but that wasn't to be either, because it landed right in the middle of the caretaker period for the council elections, and the developer, rather than wait for the council to make an assessment, went straight to VCAT on failure to determine, so right in the middle of the caretaker period. So that's where we find ourselves tonight. We're answering a case at VCAT. We've got to respond by Friday, and we've got a practice hearing on the 11th. So yeah, very little time and a lot to do, and the whole thing is going to roll out into next year, so February and April next year. So we're going to be up against a absolutely lethal legal team, and more expert witnesses than you can poke a forky stick at. So that's why we need help, and that's basically where we are tonight. Fortunately, we weren't alone. At least we had assistance of councillors. We had Steve Jolly, we had Roberto Colanzi, Jackie Fristacchi, Mike McAvoy, councillor-elect. All of them attended our meetings. We got support from Misha and Amanda and the Yarra Greens in general, Adam Bant's office, and also from Richard Wynne. Richard Wynne's met with a number of people on this, and he's been very generous with his time and advice. So so we need. We're here needing more. There's more to do, but we're very grateful for the assistance we've got. One thing we have found as in the course of this is that we're also not alone in that there are development spot fires all around. So other groups, aside from us, are being put through this same ringer. So keep that in mind as well. Now, I'd just like to close by kind of humanising it, because one of the things that kind of gets lost is that buildings are things that house people, and often the human element gets lost in all these discussions. It becomes kind of horse trading about levels up, levels down, built form, all sorts of technical things. But I'd like to just leave you with how planning actually affects people. when we first arrived in Coleman Street, it had a very diverse set of people in it, much the same as it does now. It had, you know, couples, families, elderly people, and had nothing much had been built at that point. So we had these heritage houses. There was a very frail elderly lady near the end of the street, and a set of apartments was proposed right behind the street of heritage houses. And I presume she got a letter. I mean, I don't think she would have known what to do with it. But eventually, you know, it goes through the process. It would have looked great at IDAC. You know, it would have been, you know, 1 story versus 3 stories. You know, it all stacked up. Except this thing being imposed on this lady who never experienced anything any different, traumatised her completely. So she was unable to go into her backyard again. So she effectively, because of a mundane planning decision, became imprisoned in her own home. And so instead of living out her days, you know, in peace and security, she lived out her days in fear and anxiety. And, you know, the rules say that that's okay, but when the laws that are supposed to protect us end up victimising people in their own homes, that's not okay. Thank you.